Welcome to Chasing Hardware, the podcast that sits down with the sports figures you grew up with and hears their stories. Welcome to Chasing Hardware. I am your host, Rich Lamello. Today's guest is considered one of the greatest cornerbacks of all time. He had 57 interceptions and 13 fumble recoveries in his career, not to mention another 4 picks and 2 fumble recoveries in the playoffs. He was a starting corner on 4 Super Bowl champions with the Pittsburgh Steelers, and he's been in the Pro Football Hall of Fame since 1989. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to Chasing Hardware, Mr. Mel Blount. Mel, welcome to Chasing Hardware.
Hey, Rich, it's a pleasure. Good to talk to you.
Good. I'm looking forward to our talk here today. Mel, you grew up in rural Georgia, right? You went to Lyons High School, which was a segregated high school, and you played football, basketball, baseball, and track. Is that correct?
That's correct. That's correct, Rich. Back then the schools were segregated, and I went to an all-black high school and, played every sport that they had to offer.
And in football, you were both a wide receiver and a defensive back, correct?
I played defensive back, played defensive end on the defense, and played wide receiver, and also ran kickoffs and punts back.
Okay. And of the sports of, football, hoops, baseball, and track, which was your favorite? Was it football or was it something else?
No, man, I loved basketball, and I was a pretty good basketball player. I had just a great career in high school playing basketball. But I got a scholarship offer to Southern University in football, and I'll never forget when I got to Southern, man, we had the dormitories had intramural teams, and each dormitory had a basketball team, and so we played a lot of basketball, and I always loved the game. And I think, with the proper coaching, I probably could have made it to the next level, but football turned out pretty good.
Yeah. I think very few people would have issue with that. Now, remind me, you were the youngest of 11, and family didn't have a lot in terms of means, but your parents preached hard work, and 7 ended up going to college. Is that correct?
That's correct. I was the youngest of 11 kids. There were 4 girls and 7 boys, and I tell you what, we were, the older I get, the more I realize how rich we were, because we didn't have a lot of material things, but we had a lot of love for one another, a lot of hard work on the farm, a lot of discipline, a lot of church, man. Went to church every Sunday. We would walk, and I tell my kids this now, that we would walk 4 or 5 miles to church, and they look at me like, "Oh, Daddy, you all didn't do that." But that was the way things were back then. A lot of times we would hook up the mule and wagon, and we would get on the wagon and go to church. And a lot of times we would walk. And I tell you what, those were great memories. The only thing I regret, Rich, is we didn't have cameras. We didn't have the money to have the luxury of having a camera where you could take pictures, man. I have all these memories in my mind from picking cotton and working in the tobacco and plying mules and riding bareback and all those things, but we wasn't able to capture it because we didn't have any cameras around.
Right. That's interesting. Yeah. And so you got the offer to go to Southern. Were there other schools that you were considering or that were looking for you? I mean, I know the SEC was not integrated, so that wasn't an option. But was it only Southern, or were there other schools talking to you?
Well, it's really interesting how that offer from Southern came about. We were playing a team in Meta, Georgia, and it was on their home field. And I had just an awesome game. I scored 5 touchdowns. I had a kickoff return, and had 4 touchdowns from being a wide receiver. And one of the officials who was officiating the game knew someone at Southern, and they called out there and said, "You all need to come look at this kid from Lyons. but it was called Lyons Industrial High School. And so I didn't know anybody was watching. I didn't know any of the officials knew that, but that was the story that was told to me by the head coach. The head coach from Southern University came, and we didn't know he was coming. He found out where I lived, and he talked to my father, because I wasn't there. I was off at a basketball game out of town. And so he talked to my father, said he wanted to offer me a scholarship, and my father made an executive decision that, okay, you want to offer him a scholarship, he'll come. So when I got back home, my father said, son, there was some coach here from Southern University, and he offered you a scholarship, and I told him you would come. And that's a true story. That's how it all went down. And don't you know, I went to Southern University, and the thing I think that really got my father was he promised me a job. If I would come as soon as I finished high school, that he would provide me a job, and they would give me a scholarship. So I went to Southern University. When I got out there, they put me with the police campus security, and I was a traffic director, standing in the middle of the street directing traffic. And if you know anything about Louisiana and the heat during the summer, man, it was awfully hot. But one of the greatest compliments I got from the police captain was that I was one of the hardest working people that he had ever had or had ever employed. And I credit that to my experience on the farm, from doing hard work and just, knowing the importance of putting forth a good effort. And so that's how I got to Southern University. But I probably didn't have an offer. Probably could have went to Savannah State or Fort Valley State, some of the other HBCUs. But Southern came along and made the offer. My dad accepted it on my behalf. Like I said, that's an executive decision he made, and it turned out pretty good.
Yeah. How funny is that? You come home from a hoops basketball practice and dad tells you you're going to Southern.
Yeah, that's true. And you know what? My dad was a wise man. I think he realized, hey, they're gonna give you a scholarship and a job. I can make that decision. That's a no-brainer, and that's what he did.
Yeah. And so you get to Southern, and around the same time you get there, a 6'8" wide receiver shows up named Harold Carmichael. And there's also, they were thinking of having you as a wide receiver, right? But all of a sudden they've got Harold Carmichael, and that kind of leads to you switching over to defensive back.
Well, here's what happened. Harold Carmichael came a year after I got there. When I became a sophomore, he came in as a freshman. But they had two All-American wide receivers that was there. And so I was on the scout team. I was running plays for the defense, and one of the coaches just came up to me and asked me, say, hey, we're thinking about putting you on defense. Can you play on the defense? I said, yeah. So they stuck me out there on the corner. And what happened was, it was the last game of the year, and the last game of the year is always Grambling and Southern. And James Shaq Harris, who went on to play pro ball, in fact, was the first black quarterback to play and get drafted in the modern day era of football. And so this game was at Southern University. I intercepted 3 passes as a freshman, and the rest is history. And I tell you what, when I see James Shaq Harris now, I always tell him, I say, man, I really appreciate you jump-starting my career. We always teasing and rubbing each other. But, yeah, that's kind of how it all happened. That's how it got started.
That's pretty cool. And Shaq Harris, yeah, for the listener, is the first black quarterback to open a season as a starting quarterback in the NFL with the Rams in the early 70s.
Yeah, just a tremendous player and great man. In fact, we're going to New Orleans this weekend to kick off the Legacy Bowl, which is kind of the brainchild of Doug Williams and James Shaq Harris to recognize athletes that are coming from historical black colleges. And so this will be the first year of it in New Orleans at Tulane Stadium. So we're excited about that.
Oh, that's cool. And Williams and Harris also started up, I think I've got this right. They started up the HBCU Hall of Fame, right? The Football Hall of Fame?
They sure did. And I'm on that board, but it was their idea to start a black college football Hall of Fame. And so you got guys like Willie Lanier, Art Shell, myself, James Harris, Doug Williams, who are basically board members of that Black College Hall of Fame. And so we're working real hard to try to let, black kids know that they can go to historical black colleges and still realize their dreams if they're trying to pursue a career in sports.
Yeah. And that's something I'm going to circle back to in a little bit. Well, I'm actually going to touch on it a few times throughout the interview, but I do want to talk about like the current state of HBCUs, but maybe a little bit later. While you're at Southern, you mentioned playing against Shaq Harris. His receiver is Charlie Joyner at Grambling. You're also playing against Harold Jackson of Jackson State and Kenny Burrow at Texas Southern, who most people will remember became 00 with the Oilers, and probably many others that I'm not listing. But tell me about some of those guys who you're going up against in your college days, and then you turn around and you're playing them on Sundays, just a few years later.
Well, you mentioned guys like Charlie Joyner, who I played against in college. Played against him twice a year when he was with Houston, and then he was with Cincinnati, and he wound up his career in San Diego. He's a Hall of Famer. Played against Harold Jackson, who, Tyreek Hill and those kids, they probably couldn't outrun him in the 40 or the 100-yard dash. He was just a tremendous athlete, smooth, had a lot of gears. So there wasn't a lack of talent back in those days, and played against some great players. And then when you meet up in the pros, it's a good feeling because it's a brotherhood. You come from a HBCU and you're in the pros, and we cared about one another, and we wanted to see each other succeed in what we were doing. So it's a great brotherhood of men who played at historical black colleges. Because we have a lot in common, obviously, and you want to see guys excel and do well. But those are just a few of the great players that I played against during my college career.
Yeah, and just one last thing to touch on at Southern. Well, two last things to touch on. One, so Carmichael comes in. He was like 6'8", right?
Carmichael 6'8". I played against him 3 years because he was a year behind me, and I was at an event in Philadelphia that he held, and he swear that I used to beat him up in practice all the time, and that's what made him excel and succeed in the NFL. And I tell people all the time, I say, Carmichael, he credits me for beating him up, but I think the reality of it is we were good for each other because, he was just a tremendous athlete, catch the ball, could run, and somebody that big is something that they hadn't seen.
Yeah. And also, when you were playing defensive back, right in front of you at linebacker was Isaiah Robertson, who had a hell of a career with the Rams and the Bills, right?
Oh, it's no question. We just had some great talent. Isaiah Robertson, #1 pick for the Rams. Ray Jones, another cornerback on the other side, #2 pick for Philadelphia. Kenny Ellis, just a tremendous athlete, kickoff, punt returns, running back. Went to Green Bay in the 4th round. Alvin Roche. I think out of my senior class, we had 11 guys to get drafted in the National Football League, and that was in 1970. And so we played against a lot of talent, even though, the 60s, segregation was still in place, but there was so much talent. And I think when we got to the NFL, we were ready for that level of football because of the talent that we had experienced in college.
Yeah. And speaking of segregation, so Southern is in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, obviously right down the street from LSU. Was there, I know you guys couldn't play each other, but did you ever cross paths with the guys at LSU? Were you able to kind of, measure yourself against them as players?
No, there was no way. In fact, I never knew. I knew it was in Baton Rouge, but I'd never been on their campus during the time I was at Southern. And, if people remember, in the 60s, I went to Southern in 1966. I mean, there was segregation all throughout the South. And so there wasn't any, black athletes and black kids wasn't going to LSU. LSU kids wasn't coming to Southern. And so, things obviously changed, but that's just the way things were.
Sure. So then it's 1970. The Steelers have just been not successful in any way as a team, and they draft Terry Bradshaw in the first round, and they pick a 6'3", 215-pound cornerback from Southern in the third round. And you and Bradshaw come in together. The year before, they had drafted, I guess I'll set this up this way. Everybody talks about the 74 draft for the Steelers, which obviously is an incredible draft. But if you look at the 5 or 6 years in continuum, it's got to be the greatest, 5 or 6 straight years of drafting any team has ever done. The year before you, Joe Green comes in, John Kolb, L.C. Greenwood, Terry Hanratty, who would be the backup. You and Bradshaw come in 70. In 71, this is an incredible draft. Jack Ham, Larry Brown, Dwight White, Ernie Holmes, and Mike Wagner. And then the next year, Franco Harris, Steve Furness, and Joe Gilliam. Then J.T. Thomas, and then the 74 draft, Lambert, Swan, Stallworth, Webster, and Donnie Shell as a free agent. I mean, that's just the most incredible 6-year run of drafting I think any team's ever done.
Well, I think, Rich, what you have to give credit to the scouting department, obviously, but I think you have to give a lot of credit to Chuck Noll because he knew what kind of athlete he was looking for. And so we got lucky. I mean, I wouldn't call that 6-year draft stretch luck. I think it's a lot of hard work, knowing what you're looking for, and, sticking to that formula, which is finding guys who are smart, finding guys who have speed, have the ability, and guys who have character. And out of that group of guys, when you start in 1969, Joe Green, a Hall of Famer, L.C. Greenwood should be a Hall of Famer. And then you go to the next year, in 1970, you got Bradshaw's a Hall of Famer, I'm a Hall of Famer. Ron Shanklin was the number 2 pick, was a great player, made All-Pro, and it just gets better, like you said. Each draft just kept getting better and better. Jack Ham, a Hall of Famer. Franco is a Hall of Famer. And when we get to the 1974 draft, you got Stallworth, Swan, Webster, Donnie Shell, and Jack Lambert. That's 5 guys out of that draft that are Hall of Famers. And that's just incredible. Like you said, it's just a tremendous years of drafting great players with great character who, really wanted something out of life. Yeah.
And it's funny. There was a great quote from Chuck Noll. He said, I wanted self-motivated players that he could then teach. And I think, it's pretty self-evident that that's what he did. He found self-motivated players. I want you to talk about Bill Nunn was a a sports writer and then later an editor for the Pittsburgh Courier, which was a historically Black newspaper. And he, from the early 50s, was picking his HBCU All-American team. And he started kind of working with the Steelers, and they ultimately hired him full time. Can you kind of talk a little bit about maybe what your relationship was with him, but also just the overall impact he had on the Steelers?
Bill Nunn, you can't write the history of the Steelers without this man's fingerprints all over it. Bill Nunn, what really happened, Bill Nunn was a writer, sports writer, like you said, for the Pittsburgh Courier, which was a Black paper and still in existence today. But Bill Nunn would write about sports, and he really was kind of getting on the Steeler organization for not drafting African-American kids or going, at those schools. So Dan Rooney had a meeting with him and hired him. And Bill started going into these historical Black colleges, and he found guys like L.C. Greenwood and the Mel Blounts and the Donnie Shells and the Starworths, Ernie Holmes, Glenn Edwards. And so when you talk about the run and the drafting of the Steelers, there's no way you can even talk about anything that happened in the 70s and not talk about Bill Nunn, because he had such an influence on draft day. And the thing about it was that the Rooney family, Dan Rooney, had a lot of, he had confidence and trust. He trusted Bill Nunn's judgment, and they listened to him. And so that's why you have guys like Starworth, who they found in the fourth round. And there's an interesting story about the Starworth draft. Bill Nunn went down, and back in those days, they didn't have a lot of film and video. So the film that they had, Bill Nunn took it. So other scouts, when they came to Alabama A&M looking to find film on John Starworth, there was none, because Bill Nunn had it. And so that's how Starworth lasted to the fourth round. And just stories like that, and then going into these colleges and talking to players and really seeing and looking at film on guys. So anyway, he was a big part of everything that we did, and everything that the Steelers did, even after we all had retired.
And it's great to see that he got elected to the Pro Football Hall of Fame.
He's in the Pro Football Hall of Fame, and not just for what he did with the Steelers, but I think just his influence throughout the NFL and among other scouts. They learned a lot from Bill, and the guy had an eye for talent, but he also had a formula, and he had the kind of personality that people could talk to, and he was an educator, a visionary. The guy knew what he was doing, and he knew what it took, what kind of players it took to win.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Bill Nunn, like you said, his name is, kind of all over the certainly the accomplishments of that 70s run with the Steelers. And yeah, just, what an amazing contribution. And tell me about Chuck Noll. Tell me about being, 22-year-old kid. You've gone to a segregated high school. You've gone to a HBCU college. This is going to be your first time you're playing for a white coach and playing with and against white players. Tell me what the experience was like. And you're, oh, by the way, you're coming up north. Tell me about that experience.
Well, Rich, it was a culture shock, obviously. There was so many things you had to adjust to. You mentioned adjusting to a white coach and playing with white players. And then the environment. Pittsburgh, you come into a northern city, cold weather. I never seen snow before, and just trying to make a professional football team. And I think the thing that really kept me going was just my confidence in myself, and knowing that I had the ability to compete at a high level. It was different, being coached by a white guy, a white man, especially, I couldn't stand for people to yell at me, and then, if I made a mistake, I was the kind of athlete that it was a lot. You could get a lot more out of me if you talked to me and explained to me, what I did wrong versus yelling at me and screaming at me. And then when that happened, only thing I could think about was go back to things that I had seen in the South, and seeing how white people was treating blacks in the South, and it wasn't good at all, believe me. And so therefore, my reaction wasn't good. I could get really rebellious, so that was just a period of growing and maturing as a person. But those were some of the challenges that I had to deal with personally. And I'm just glad that Chuck Noll, the Rooney organization, they really allowed guys and gave us opportunities to grow and mature as people instead of trying to make us robots. They let everybody be who they were, and they gave you enough room to make those mistakes and to grow as people.
Yeah. And Chuck Noll, just over the years, reading different things about him, you have some coaches who, sleep in their office and, burn, the candles late. He wanted everybody to go home and be with their family at dinner at night. And I remember reading one time, it might've been when he passed away, somebody talked to him about that, he wasn't a very big motivator. And his quote was, "If I have to motivate them, I have to cut them." Basically the point, these guys are adults. If I have to, give them a rah-rah speech, they're not the guy I want in my locker room. What was Chuck like for you?
Well, Chuck was a smart guy. Chuck was quiet, but he was the kind of guy, like the old commercial say about E.F. Hutton. When he spoke, everybody listened. He was a no-nonsense guy. He told you the way it was. I think he was fair with everybody. That doesn't mean that he treated everybody the same, but I think he was fair with everyone. And I like Chuck. I think anybody who played for Chuck would say that they liked him. They just probably didn't know him like some coaches are just outgoing and friendly and carry on conversations with you. He wasn't that kind of guy. And then you got to understand Chuck Noll came from under the Paul Brown coaching tree. And Paul Brown, that's the way he was. He was, in fact, there's some reporter named him the emperor. He was the emperor, which means he was, he was above everybody else, and what he said, that's what went. There was no question about who was in charge of the organization or the football team anyway. And so, the older I get, the more I can appreciate the way he was.
Right. Yeah, it was funny. I interviewed Charlie Joyner for this podcast a few months ago. And as you pointed out earlier, he had played in Cincinnati for 3 or 4 years before San Diego. And that's what he was saying about Paul Brown. He's like, anything that happened in that organization, Paul Brown knew about. And it wasn't just on the football field. And, I think that the guys who learned from him, Bill Walsh, Chuck Noll, Don Shula, they picked up on that quickly. Weeb Eubank. I think that was kind of a recurring theme in his coaching tree.
Oh yeah, he definitely was one of the coaching tree members of the Paul Brown tree, and we used to have those battles, man. I mean, twice a year. When Paul Brown was in Cleveland, then when he went to Cincinnati and formed that team, and I tell you what. When we went against Cincinnati, when Chuck Noll went against Paul Brown, man, it was intense. I mean, he was a different week of practice because, I guess out of respect and just wanted to beat the guy who he learned from. And so it was something special.
Yeah, that's fascinating. That's interesting. And yet it's funny. I was reading about the 74 season Super Bowl, and full disclosure, I'm both a Vikings and a Browns fan. So you were a thorn in my side for my entire childhood. But the 74 season Super Bowl, your first Super Bowl, I remember reading that, you guys get down to New Orleans, and was it the case that Chuck, kind of let you guys go out a few nights, and then as you got closer to the game, it was time to tighten up and get ready?
Well, that was the way he was. He wanted us to enjoy the moment, enjoy the fact that we made it to the Super Bowl, but he wanted us to have fun. But then when it came time to get ready for the game, he said, "All right, guys, everybody in the rooms, starting Wednesday, we're going to work." And I think the results is evidence of the kind of leader, the kind of coach he was. And he knew what buttons to push to get his players ready. And I tell you, man, I couldn't have asked for a better career. Couldn't ask for better coaches, even though there were times when, maybe you didn't agree or we didn't get along. But the bottom line is we got the job done. We were able to do something that hadn't been done before, and just be a part of a great legacy that was left for the Pittsburgh Steelers and the city of Pittsburgh.
Sure. And when you guys got there, like I said, the team had I think they were like 1-13 the year before, and then they win a few more games that first year. I think they were 5-9, and then 6-8, and then the breakthrough season is 72, and you guys are playing the Raiders, and the Raiders score a touchdown to go up late in the game. And then the Immaculate Reception happens, and you're on the sidelines. Tell me, kind of what your take on that play was, what was going through your mind at that point?
Well, I was on the sideline, and, we were hoping for something would happen. We wasn't, the Immaculate reception wasn't, what we were expecting. But I just kind of felt like, okay, we got to get this ball down where we can score. And don't Bradshaw eluded a couple of pass rushes and just, this guy had a cannon on his arm, and he just slung it. And I saw the hit Tatum made on Frenchy Fuqua, but I didn't see Franco. That when I saw the hit, then the next thing I heard the crowd screaming and going crazy, and then I see Franco running with the ball. And, you watch that play over and over. It was just an incredible play. It was really a miracle. And 1972, we had a young team, but we didn't know how to win. That play happened and put us in the playoffs against the Miami Dolphins. That's the year Miami went undefeated. Miami came to Pittsburgh and brought the weather with them from Miami. And this is in December, and we got 60-some degree weather in the championship game. This is the AFC Championship. We beat Miami. We're going to the Super Bowl, and we're going to play the Redskins that they played. But, it was just one of those magical moments in sports that, as a teammate I was a part of. And I tell you what, it was Franco. Our team changed when Franco came. When Franco came, we didn't lose. We were in the playoff consistently every year after Franco got here. And that's when we start winning championships.
Right. And so Miami wins that game, that next game, and they go on to their undefeated season. They win next year over the Vikings. And then you guys get to the Super Bowl, and you beat Minnesota. Tell me about that game. You had an interception in that game. Tell me about that. Now you've been in the league for 5 years, and it all comes together. Tell me about that feeling, as the game is winding down. Your defense has completely shut down the Minnesota offense. I think they ran for like less than 20 yards. Tell me what the thinking was there.
Well, going into the week, we were confident because people had said that we didn't belong there and that the Vikings, they was the purple people eaters and they were going to just chew us up. And but if you start up front with our front four, L.C. Greenwood just had a tremendous game. Dwight White comes out of the hospital. He was sick, had some kind of virus, and plays a great game. Ernie Holmes and Joe Green. I mean, guys just – Brian Tarkenton had nowhere to go, no time to throw. And our secondary and linebackers, I mean, we were blanketing receivers. Glenn Edwards makes a big-time hit that pops the ball up in the air that I run under and make the interception. Just big plays after big plays. LC batting the ball around like a volleyball. So we completely dominated the Vikings. And I think when we won that Super Bowl, I think the confidence level of each player went to a whole new level. And we realized that, hey, we've arrived and we can compete with anybody. And so we come back in 1975 and do it all over again. I had a great year being Defensive Player of the Year, leading the league in interceptions. And everybody, just guys had big-time seasons at key positions, whether it was the running back and Franco or the wide receivers, Bradshaw. Everybody played up to their potentials. And, we get to another Super Bowl. And we were even better the year 1976, had the best team, in my opinion, of all the teams that we had. And we were on our way marching towards the Super Bowl again and went to Baltimore. Burt Jones and Roger Carr and Raymond Chester and all those guys, they had a great team over there, but we beat them, but we lost Rocky Bleier and Franco Harris in that game. And so when we get to the Oakland Raiders in a championship game out there to go to the Super Bowl, we had no running game, and so we lost that game. But we had a tremendous team, just loaded with talent, but we couldn't run the ball, and the Raiders won that game. And so we come back. That was in 1976. So we come back in 1977. We miss again, but then the next 2 years, 78 and 79, obviously was great years, and we wind up winning 2 more Super Bowls.
Yeah, and that 76 team, you guys get off to a bit of a slow start. You're 1-4, and Bradshaw is hurt. He gets hit by Turkey Joe Jones of Cleveland. You guys win your last 9 games, and this is just an incredible statistic. You give up 28 points in those 9 games.
Yeah.
I mean, that is just, most teams are happy to, come out of a game with 28 points. Your overall points per game is 10 points per game given up that year. And I've read in some places where people say it's, the best team of all time. And, sadly, ironically, doesn't win a championship.
Well, there would be debates about whether or not we had the greatest defense, or whether it was the Chicago Bears or the Purple People Eaters or the Fearsome Foursome. I mean, you can go on with defensive names, but sure. I think we can stack our record up against anybody and the accomplishments. Where guys are once their careers are over, how many guys we have in the Hall of Fame versus I think our stats would match up against anybody's. But yeah, we had some great players, man, and I think it goes back to when we started out talking about the draft and the players and really what kind of players Chuck Noll wanted, guys who would motivate themselves and didn't have to be motivated. And so, yeah, it was a great run.
Yeah, you had a great quote. You said, "You're no better than the people you're surrounded with," and you could go down the line on this team, and any player could be picked as an All-Pro. And it's true. I mean, year to year, different of the 22 were being picked. One of the stats that I find just amazing is your defensive backfield. So you and JT Thomas, Mike Wagner, Glenn Edwards, and Donnie Shell, between the between the five of you over your careers, had over 200 interceptions. I mean, obviously you had 57, but that is just a staggering number for 4 or 5 guys who played in the 70s when teams were just not throwing that much. I mean, through the mid 70s, I think we're going to get to the Mel Blount Rule in a second, but the year before that rule was put in place, teams were throwing for less than 150 yards a game. So
I know, but that stat you just mentioned is very interesting. I didn't know that. Yeah. I didn't know that out of the 5 guys that we had over 200 interceptions. That's pretty impressive. But hey, look, a lot of that football is the ultimate team sport, as you know. So when you're playing behind guys like L.C. Greenwood and Joe Green and Dwight White and Ernie Holmes, I mean, if you're any kind of player, you should come up with some interceptions. So a lot of that is credited to those guys, and the team concept of playing team defense. But it's still pretty impressive.
Yeah. It's funny. I interviewed Gary Fensick about a month ago, and he said something kind of similar. But he said, teams try to figure out, well, how do we, get a better pass defense? He's like, I have an idea. Get a better pass rush. It's amazing what happens when you've got 4 studs up front.
It's no question. It all starts up front, man. And I think that's where it all starts up there. So if you want a good pass defense, get a good pass rusher.
Yeah. So we just referenced this a second ago. So in 1977, coming in, teams are averaging less than 150 yards passing a game. Scoring's at a 40-year low. The league makes 2 big rule changes. The first one is offensive linemen can now extend their arms to kind of better block and protect quarterbacks, because I think the year before a big number of quarterbacks had gotten hurt, to include yours, Terry Bradshaw. So all of a sudden, offensive linemen are in a little bit better position, in a lot better position to protect. And then there's the rule that you can no longer hit receivers going down the field. There are no hits after 5 yards from the line of scrimmage, and it's called the Mel Blount Rule. Now, Bob Trumpy, who you played against, tight end for the Bengals for years, and then an NBC announcer, said there are very few guys in NFL history who are so good at something that they changed the rules because of it. And obviously, about as big a accolade as you can get from the competition. Tell me, and I've kind of read up on your take on it. Tell me, kind of your initial take, and then kind of how you view it now.
Well, Rich, look, when they first changed the rule, I'll never forget Chuck Noll. He had all of us. I wasn't staying in Pittsburgh at the time, so he flew all the defensive backs in, went over the rule, and talked about how we were going to adjust to it, and I'll never forget he was saying, Mel, this is because of you. In other words, they named this rule the Mel Blount Rule. And so I kind of took it as, almost as an insult that, okay, so you all think that that's the only way that I can play. And I really did. And so the thing about it, we made adjustments. I'll never forget, they was trying to teach us a different way of backpedaling and, because you couldn't touch the guys. And I wasn't bought in. I didn't buy into it. So I still played bump and run. And when I got off, I wasn't turning my back when a receiver broke into his route. And so still went on and, we were able to win 2 more Super Bowls. But fast forward to when I retired and when my kids start talking about, Dad, they got a rule named after you, and I took a whole different perspective on it. to this day, and now my grandkids are talking about the Mel Blount Rule, and they got a rule named after their grandfather, and so it's a proud thing. I'm really, I go from one extreme to the other, because at first, I was almost insulted, to now being, real proud to know that I had such an impact on the game that they would change the rules because of the way I played and name it a Mel Blount Rule. So it's just been a tremendous journey, and the older I get, the more I appreciate it.
Yeah, that's cool. The ultimate honor. Somebody said, I read somewhere, somebody said, it's the most important non-safety related rule change in 50 years. And somebody else said the only other person who they specifically changed rules because the person was so good at it was one of the pioneers of the game, Amos Alonzo Stagg, the coach. They had to change rules because he was dominating the game so much. So kind of the ultimate honor, I guess. Now I read about. Go ahead.
I'm sorry, Rich, but yeah, and I was just at the Super Bowl, and there were a lot of players there, and there was a player who came up and said, "Man," he said, "when I saw Mel Blount and they said he was a cornerback, I knew right away I wasn't gonna make it into the NFL." But the guy went on and became a Hall of Famer, and so anyway, I was big and tall for my size, and I had a wingspan that was unheard of at that position. But the key thing was that I could run, and I could change directions, and so it was a big advantage to me playing against receivers, and especially down around the red zone, because I had height, I had reach, and I had speed and quickness.
Yeah. Yeah, I mentioned earlier I'd spoken to Charlie Joyner, and I asked him, toughest DBs to go up against, and obviously you don't want to forget names, but he said, let's just put it this way: I always knew where Ronnie Lott was on the field, and Mel Blount, with that length and the arms and the speed, he's like, he could just eat you up. Those are the two guys who you were trying to figure out, like, where are they? What do I need to do? And speaking of receivers, what was it like in practice playing against Swan and Stallworth? I mean, how much did Chuck have you guys go against each other, and what was it like covering, effectively two Hall of Famers?
Oh man, that was what it was all about. We challenged each other in practice, and we took pride in not letting them catch a ball, and they took pride in trying to catch one on us. And so it was a battle. But you know what? It made us all better, because when we got in games, it was easy because we had practiced against the best receivers all week. So when we got in games, and we was going up against big-time receivers like Charlie Joyner, Isaac Curtis, guys who, everybody was afraid of. So we took it. We really took pride in just shutting people down. I mean, that was the attitude of every player on that defense.
Sure.
Going against Stallworth and Swan, it just made us all better. We made them better, and they made us better.
Yeah. Who were the guys on on the other teams where, I mean, obviously, your team's success spoke for itself, but who were the guys where you knew you needed your A game that day when you played them?
Well, there was a guy in Cleveland named Greg Pruitt, and I tell you what, we knew when we were playing against that guy, we better have our A game. And Cincinnati had some great players. Kenny Anderson was a great quarterback. He got rid of the ball real quick, but Bill Walsh, that's kind of where that West Coast started at. And then you get a guy like Earl Campbell coming to your conference. You got to face him twice a year. Then you better put your big boy pants on and be ready to play. So there wasn't a lack of competition, and every week we knew that it was going to be a tough game.
Yeah, when I was speaking to Gary Fensick, he said I played in the NFL with a 34-inch waist Campbell's thighs were 35 inches. He's like, imagine that coming at you.
Yeah, I know he was something, man. We knew we had to be ready to play. When Earl came into the league, we hadn't seen nothing like him. The NFL hadn't seen anything like him. He was big, he was fast, strong, and he would hurt you. So, but we were able to get through that, and I think, the AFC at that time, just a lot of great players, and there are a lot of great players now, but the game is different. Players are more protected, which is a good thing. And so it's always been competition. You get that level, there's no easy outs, that's for sure.
Sure. Who were some of the quarterbacks? I mean, obviously you mentioned Ken Anderson. You saw him twice a year for, the bulk of your career. Who were some of the other, obviously a couple of legendary Super Bowl games against Roger Staubach. Who were some of the quarterbacks where, you always knew that they were coming?
Well, there was Greasy down in Miami. We had, we played against Joe Namath. He was kind of going towards the end of his career, but we played against him. Houston had a good quarterback, and Cleveland had and Brian Sipes. They had a good quarterback. I mean, there was good quarterbacks everywhere. Stabler, Dan Pastorina down in Houston. I mean, hey, look, every team had the best that they could find, and those guys could sling it. And so we knew, we had to play. The quarterback that Charlie Joyner played with out in San Diego.
Dan Fouts.
Dan Fouts. These guys are all Hall of Famers. I mean, we played against some good quarterbacks.
Yeah, and you guys had, was it 5 straight years you played the Raiders in the postseason? So there was no shortage of going up against Ken Stabler in big money games.
Ken Stabler, Burt Jones. I mean, you could just go on and on. But Stabler, man, look, this guy was a warrior. He definitely was, and left-handed threw the ball. I mean, he was a competitor too, and I think guys like that, man, just they are all the reason why that the NFL is where it is today. Just great players helped build this game to what it is, and kind of was a blueprint of what quarterbacks should be and what they should look like and how they should perform. And so, I even played against Doug Williams. He came in with Tampa Bay, big, strong, big-time arm. So there were plenty of good quarterbacks around.
Sure. Well, I guess there are 2 things I would like to hear about at this point. One is, after you retired, you went to work for the NFL for 6 or 7 years for Pete Rozelle in a player relations role. And kind of simultaneously, you were starting up first in Georgia and then in Pennsylvania, the Mel Blount Youth Home. I would love to, hear like a minute or 2 about what it was like working in NFL headquarters. And then, please tell me about the youth homes, which, is something you've been working on for, you've been running for the better part of 4 decades now.
Well, I think one of the best things that ever happened to me was when I went to work for the National Football League, working under Pete Rozelle, working with Roger Goodell and Joe Brown and Pete Abertani. Now, Roger obviously is the commissioner now, but he was a guy that I worked with along with Pete Abertani. Both of those guys are still there. Pete Abertani is an kind of assistant to the commissioner. But I learned so much about the game off the field, and it was just a tremendous experience and an opportunity for me to learn more about the business of football. And so that was a great experience. And then while doing that, Rich, I just had in my heart a desire to try to help kids, because I know what my background was and where I came from. And so I had a unique experience. I had in the 70s when we were winning Super Bowls, I would go back home, and I had nieces, 8th graders, 9th graders, kids who were my nieces and nephews, and they would go back to school and tell their friends their Uncle Mel was home. Well, after school, parents would be bringing their kids out to the farm, and they want you to take pictures, sign autographs, throw the football. And I saw more in their eyes than just that. I saw a real yearning for, kids just wanted hope. They wanted help. And so we started the Mel Blount Youth Home there in Vidalia, Georgia, out on the farm where I grew up, where I worked in the fields. And basically what I wanted to do, I wanted those kids to have the same kind of work ethic experience that I have, learning a lot about responsibility, respecting life, taking care of animals and, having that responsibility of feeding and making sure, because that animal depends on you. And because I felt that's what we needed, and I still to this day feel that that's what a lot of our kids are missing, just, having respect for one another and having respect for life. And if you look what's happening in our communities with kids killing each other, not respecting the elderly, all these things that we're trying to do with the Youth Home and with the Mel Blount Youth Leadership Initiative. And so we've even gone a step further now that we are, we've been doing this, like you said, for 40 plus years. We've teamed up with a organization called Nexus Dental Systems. And this is a national group that is educating people about sleep apnea. And sleep apnea it's a serious problem. It's a huge problem. Obviously, we've lost people in the NFL from it. Reggie White, for an example. And so it's a problem. And like 1 out of 5 Americans suffer from sleep disorder, breathing. And the majority of these people don't even know they have the problem. So what we're trying to do, we're trying to fix that issue. The other thing is kids are in danger as well. And so many of the health problems and the behavior problems that we deal with at the youth home and young people, can be attributed to sleep disorder. Kids are not getting enough rest. They're having problems breathing while they're sleeping. And so we're trying to fix those problems, trying to educate people, and we want to get them help and make them better so they can be productive citizens, because the best resources we have is our young people. And so that's what we're trying to do. And for anybody that's out there listening, obviously we want you to get involved and learn more about sleep apnea. Want you to get screened so you can find out if you have that issue. It's a real serious issue. And so they can go to dreamsleep.rest and get more information about who we are and what we're doing. And so those are some of the things I'm really focused in on now, because we just want to take it to another level, keep reaching kids, keep making them better, and getting them in a situation where they can be productive.
Right. That's great. That's great. And the first one opened in Georgia back in the early 80s, right?
We opened the boys' home in 1983 in Vidalia, Georgia. It's still up and running. We got a lot of kids there from all over the country. And then in 1989, I came here outside of Pittsburgh and bought a piece of property, and we built and developed a home here. And we're doing similar same things, but we got smart over the years, and we start diversified and doing a lot of day programs so we can reach more kids and get more bang for the buck. And it's been really great. And if you're ever in this area, we'd love for you to come and see us. And for people who want to know more about us, they can find us on Facebook, or they can go to our website, melblount.com, and they can stroll under the different pages and find us on the Mel Blount Youth Leadership Initiative. and we'd love to hear from you. Love for you to see what we're doing.
Okay, that's great. Well, thank you for that. And I guess I would love to just wrap up. You're a product of an HBCU, Southern University, and kind of very interesting things, happened over the last couple of years. Deion Sanders takes the head job at Jackson State, has a lot of success, both on the field, but also recruiting. Eddie George goes to Tennessee State. What's your take on some of those moves? And I'd just love to, kind of hear your thoughts on that.
I think it's the best thing ever happened to the HBCUs. And when you get someone like Deion Sanders or Eddie George, they bring instant credibility. I think it helps in recruiting. It helps as far as fundraising for your program, and it's just a tremendous turn of events that has happened. I think one of the things, since we're doing this interview in this Black History Month, the situation with George Floyd, I think it touched the conscience of America, corporate America, white America, and we've seen more concerns about what's happening in our communities and at our universities. I think the corporate pocketbooks have loosened up. They're starting to be more support for the universities. I think with someone like Deion and Eddie George coming in, young people are starting to realize that they can go to these HBCU universities and learn and grow and get educated and still have the same opportunities to pursue, if it's in sports or business or whatever it is. And so, it's some interesting times that are going on in our country, and I think the time is now for Black America to take advantage of it and make things better for the future as far as our young people are concerned.
Yep, I hear you. Well, Mel Blount, I have to tell you, thank you very much for coming on to my podcast, Chasing Hardware. It's been a pleasure to listen to you as you kind of talk about growing up in Georgia, your years at Southern, and some of the competition you faced there. Obviously, the incredible run you and the rest of the Steelers had, and then what you've been up to with the Mel Blount Youth Home, et cetera, since you retired. It's been a pleasure having you on. Thank you very much, Mel, for coming on to Chasing Hardware.
Thanks a lot, Rich. Good talking with you.
Excellent. Take care. And thank you for listening to Chasing Hardware. I've been your host, Rich Lumello. The Michael Stanley Band brought us in, and the Suburbs with Life is Like are going to take us out. Speak to you next time.
Tonight, it feels like life. Come on. Life is like. Life is like. Life is like.